Hi, everyone, and thanks for being here today. And this is a perfect segue from the previous discussion on how to streamline and secure your data supply chain. So what I'll talk about today is a couple of different patterns that we're seeing and how do you, from an architecture standpoint, think about putting together a set of data management functions that cover the entire data supply chain. Just a second, let me see how I can forward to the next slide. Awesome. Okay. All right. So today, what we see is in organizations of all shapes and sizes, there is quite a bit of inefficiencies going on. So that serves up in different formats. So we see complexity in terms of data that they have to deal with, whether it's the volume of data or types of different data sets, whether it is from on-prem or cloud SaaS type of data providers. And these environments are being stood up in various different environments as well. There are all these legacy platforms that are on-prem. Then there are new platforms being stood up in cloud data lakes and cloud data warehouse environments. At the same time, there is not much in terms of automation and reusability of these data engineering pipelines. So these are being built in a very custom ad hoc way so that whenever there's a new data source that needs to be provided for downstream use cases, then you have to go through the same process all over again. The other big challenge that we see is that there is quite a bit of I would say, lack of governance in terms of either it is very kind of traditional governance model or there is no governance. So oftentimes that becomes a challenge because especially in regulated verticals or where you need to have proper security and controls around your data, without the governance, a lot of these initiatives don't go very far. So how do you think about this from a data ops standpoint so that you're streamlining that as part of your process? And then last but not least, it is all about providing quick access to the data to your data consumers in a self-service manner. So that is often a challenge because a lot of times these become IT projects where as the data needs to be provided, there needs to be a IT team that needs to be stood up that actually builds these data engineering pipelines and makes the data available. So those are some of the common patterns that we see in terms of what enterprises have to deal with in a complex data environment. So before I get into the specifics of how Arena platform from Zaloni solves these issues, let me talk a little bit about the modern data architecture and what are some of the components in terms of your supply chain of data all the way from your source systems as you need to provide this data to your target systems, whether these are applications or ML use cases that you're building or BI and reporting tools that you want to serve this data out of. So what we see is that there are, first of all, a set of deployment layers that you need to think about, whether it is you're deploying on-prem, you're managing your platforms, data platforms that are on-prem, or they're in cloud. So they could be object stores in cloud like S3 and ADLS, or they could be more of a cloud data warehouse like Snowflake, or an object store, a document object store like MongoDB and others. So you need to think about your storage and compute layer that you're deploying these platforms to manage. But then you need to think about your data management functions. How do you ingest data from various sources? How do you manage the metadata? And this is the technical, business, and operational metadata. How do you do various tasks in terms of data integration, in terms of standardization and merging and correlating data sets and making it available for downstream use cases? Then you need to think about your governance and data quality aspects in terms of who has access to what data, role-based access control, masking and tokenization of sensitive attributes, and so on and so forth. And while you do all of these different data management functions, make sure you are capturing lineage so that you can comply and make sure your risk teams are comfortable in terms of how you're making this data available, to whom you're making it available, and there is auditability and traceability of various steps. And then you need to think about how do you enable some of the self-service functions in terms of data prep, because not always your data engineering team or the IT team will be aware of the format and the structure and the meaning of the data. So how do you enable data prep in a self-service manner? And then also being able to provide a catalog or a marketplace of these data sets so that people can, first of all, come and find data, and then they can use that data for various downstream use cases. So that's how we think about kind of the set of data management functions that are required as part of this data supply chain. So as Arena, as the go-to-market for Arena, as we position ourselves and then enable our customers to be able to modernize their data platforms, we think about the core functionality of these data management functions in terms of these 3 C's. The first is catalog. So how do you inventory data wherever it exists? And we are seeing that it exists in an increasingly decentralized manner in various different data stores. So being able to inventory the data, being able to capture active metadata, being able to then classify and profile that data are some of the core functions in terms of our catalog function. Then we think about our control pillar, which is essentially all about data governance. So how do you make sure that you can trust this data with proper data quality checks, where you can separate out the good data from the bad data? You need to think about masking and tokenization of sensitive attributes. You need to think about role-based access control, capturing lineage along each step of the way. And then last but not least, you need to think about the data consumption aspect of it. So who are your data consumers? How are they going to be enabled out of this platform in a self-service manner so that they can come and shop for data in a data marketplace? They can enrich those data sets, collaborate around them with annotations and tagging and providing various aspects, creating new enriched data sets if needed, and then being able to also provision it into a sandbox so that they can do ad hoc exploratory analytics without any IT team being involved. So that's kind of the core of our platform in terms of catalog, control, and consume. One other aspect I wanted to touch on is a lot of times the data storage layer needs to be partitioned in a way so that proper security controls can be provided in a policy-based approach. So we think about this end zone governance. So we call this the end zone governance. We think about this as a zone-based architecture where data can come in and land in a given zone. And for an example, I'm calling this the raw zone. But then you may want to apply some processing on that data in terms of masking and tokenization of sensitive attributes and doing data quality checks and so on and so forth. And then you may want to publish that kind of validated data set into a trusted zone so that now your end users can come in and access the data from the trusted zone so that it is certified and it has gone through these checks and balances. Then we also see in this zone-based architecture that there's need for lines of businesses being able to create their own data sets for their specific use cases, in addition to the data sets that were brought in from the source systems. So we see a need for something like a refined zone or a use case specific zone where you can populate and create these new data sets and then also publish them for broader consumption. And then last but not least, we see a need for the experimentation area, if you will, where you're able to provision sandboxes, where you're able to do your use case quickly in a self-service manner. So this zone-based governance is something that we see being commonly used that enables agility and self-service with the proper governance controls in place. And then these can be defined based on security policies or governance policies that you're putting in place. And they can be tied to certain roles. In this case, we're showing you in an example like how who has access to which zones. For example, data scientists and data analysts have access to the trusted zone, but data scientists also have access to the raw zone because they may want to be able to use the raw data in its original format. So this is an essential part of kind of the data ops streamlining and the security aspects of how you want to create your end-to-end pipelines from source to target. So just to summarize, you need to think about how you can streamline your data ops processes for your analytic success. And to do that, one of the key aspects is you need to think about a unified approach where you're not having silo of data management functions. You're doing this in a continuum, if you will, so that all the way from ingestion to consumption of data is done with a common metadata layer, with a common security layer, so that you can reduce that amount of friction, if you will. You're doing this efficiently, so you need to think about automation and reusable pipelines that you're building, so that you don't, when a new data set needs to be onboarded, you don't have to create yet another pipeline. You can reuse the existing pipelines based on some state information and things like that. And you need to be able to do this from a standardized way, from a governance perspective, so that it's the right size governance. It's not just one size fits all type of model, but you have to actually standardize these data pipelines so that certain data sets may be tightly controlled, whereas other data sets may be lightly controlled. And so that's kind of one of the key requirements we see from an agility standpoint. And then last but not least, you need to keep the end user in mind. So the data consumers, whether they're the data science teams, data analysts, or even business users, may want to come and find data sets and use it in a self-service manner with the proper trust, with the proper governance in place, without having an IT team being involved. So that's an important aspect of the data ops streamlining and security aspects you need to think about. So that's kind of the summary of what I wanted to talk about. With that, I'll hand it over back to Leighton.